It's Ashleigh from Sweet Dreams Bake Shop, and the other day you guys said that you wanted to see more box cake mix videos where I amp them up and make an over-the-top cake. So today I decided to choose a box cake mix that maybe some of you haven't seen before. This is from Superstore, which is a Canadian grocery store, so I am going to try it out. It sounded really interesting. So a couple things that I noticed that were different right away about this box cake mix is that it calls for melted butter instead of vegetable oil, which lends me to believe that this is going to be a little bit more dense than your average cake box mix. It also calls for milk as well, which is different than some of the box cake mixes I've used before. And this smelled so good. Very different than other vanilla cake mixes I've used before. Like all box cake mixes though, this came together relatively quickly, and all you have to do is mix up all of the ingredients with those dry ingredients. Now it is very thick compared to other types of cake mixes though, I will say that. I feel like this texture would be great for cake carving, so if I ever do a carved cake in future with a box cake mix, I think I would use this one again. Now I do add a few things here and there to the box cake mix just to spice things up a little bit more. This is the leftover crackling from my choux pastry tutorial the other day. Now one mistake that I do make is that this stuff is incredibly sticky, so I should have made sure that my parchment paper was covering the whole bottom portion. Luckily they still did unmold from the pan, but I did lose a few of those yummy bits. I was pleasantly surprised that 2 boxes of that cake mix allowed me to make a 3-tiered cake. Now my last tier, my bottom tier, is going to be a little bit thinner, but that's all right because I'm going to create kind of a woodsy looking slab with it. Whenever you're baking cakes, I like to do it at 325 degrees Fahrenheit. Lower and slower is better, and actually this box cake mix called for that temperature. You guys know Italian meringue buttercream is my favorite buttercream to work with, but I'm actually going to be using American buttercream just like the box suggested. We want to make this as simple as possible. My general rule of thumb when I'm making American buttercream is to use about a block for every 2 tiers. So I have about a block and a half here, which is approximately 700 grams of butter. Then you go ahead and add in your icing sugar, and I also use some very special vanilla bean paste as well. So here is my cake. You can see that I lost a little bit of that crackling there, but it is all good. Since this is the bottom tier and I want it to remain very stable, I'm not going to slice it in half and fill it or anything. The coverage of the buttercream on the outside is going to be good enough. The texture in this was actually quite good. I was surprised at how good the crumb was. This is not a sponsored video by Superstore brand products or anything. It actually is just a really decent cake mix. It is a little bit more expensive at $5 per box. If I could go back in time, I would repurchase all of my pans and make sure they all had removable bottoms. An American buttercream crusts up a lot faster, so it really only has to spend about 30 minutes in the fridge before it develops a crust on it. Then you can go ahead and take them out of the fridge and coat it with that outer coating. I re-whipped this buttercream for about 10 minutes or so, which does help it get that nice white color, but I also added in some white food coloring as well. It also matters which brand of butter you use too, and of course we have all different types of butter from around the world, so really you just have to work at which one is going to get you which color. I'm not worrying at all about the little gaps or spaces that might show up on this cake after coating this because we are going to turn it into a little tree stump afterwards, which we want that kind of rustic look. I highly recommend cake boards. I'm just using my plate because it's just for me. To create this little effect in the center, I'm just going on directly and adding some food gel right onto the buttercream. You can mix it in and then pipe it, or you can also airbrush this as well, whatever you want to do. For this last tier, I am just mixing it all together and creating this nice light pink shade. As per usual, for all of the things that I'm using today, I'll link it down in the description box below. Now I'm going to start tiering my cakes. Now some people like to decorate a lot of their cake first and then tier it. I like to tier it first and then decorate it. I just find it cuts down on the amount that I have to do and I can visualize things a lot better. So as you saw there, I put down all of my bubble tea straws and then I also put a cake board in between. Super important that you make sure that your cakes are fully chilled before you do this. And if you are going to be traveling with this cake, make sure to put a whole dowel down the center. I did not do that with this cake because there's not going to be a whole lot of movement with this, but you'll notice that I still did put a smaller dowel in the center. Now I'm going to be using this grass tip. I did a whole video on tips if you want to go and see that and how to use your piping bag. And what I'm doing now is I'm just putting grass all the way along. My whole vision for this cake was I kind of wanted it to look a little bit more whimsical, but look like some bunnies are on an Easter egg hunt. I also want to mention that when I'm doing a more simplistic or clean cake, I do make sure to be really precise with everything. You'll notice that I have gaps and things on here, and that's completely fine because we're going to cover it up. I wasted a lot of time in the beginning of my cake decorating being really perfect and being a perfectionist with things, but I always ended up covering it up anyway. So really just do whatever works for you guys. Now I'm using my leaf tip, and I find this leaf tip just brings everything together so beautifully. I really want some movement in this cake, so I'm going to be creating lots of vines and patches here. Now let's get into this tree stump portion. So whenever I paint on cakes, I generally just like to use airbrush colors. I find it's all mixed perfectly and it's the right consistency. And this is Americolor in chocolate brown. I'm just taking my paintbrush first and I'm going to all of those natural little holes and gaps that developed, and I'm using that to create the knots in my tree. Then I'm dipping this little cake tool into my edible airbrush and I'm using it to create those lines. Now the trick with this is not to do too many. I believe this type of tree is a birch tree, which I am trying to recreate. And when I look at pictures of them, there are a lot of these, but not too many. So you do want to make sure that you're a little bit more sparing with them. If you don't have a tool like this, you can just use your paintbrush, but the reason that I like this tool is because it also kind of indents it at the same time, so it does create that texture that we're looking for as well. I really wanted to make something with a lot of fondant details all over it, so I'm going to do a lot of mini flowers all over the place. I am going to be using my punch cutter today, and whenever you're using a punch cutter, you do want to make sure that it's relatively thin, but not too thin that you can't get that detail in there. I really want that look where everything is really nice and full in this area, so I'm making sure to put a lot of flowers on those green patches. Feel free to mix in a lot of different florals here. I've mentioned this in other videos, but I used to kind of cut out all of my fondant work first, let it dry, and then place it on, but doing it this way is just so much faster. I made sure to save some of that green buttercream so that I can fill in all of the gaps here. If I placed it beforehand, then I wouldn't have that look where the flowers look like they're actually embedded in that greenery. Now we're gonna make those little bunny figures. So to make these figures here, I'm just taking my fondant. Satin ice fondant, by the way, is the type of fondant that I like to use, and I'm just rolling it into a little ball. And one of the most useful things that I can tell you is whenever you're creating things that there's two of, arms, feet, ears, whatever it is that you may be creating for your animal, make sure that you take a ball of fondant and then split it in half. That way everything is always going to remain even. For the paws here, I'm just indenting it with this tool to create the little toes. Generally, I like to create part of the animal or figure on my countertop, and then I place part of it onto the cake. I just find it easier to visualize and make sure that everything is working together. Now for the front of the bunny's face, I'm adding on this little portion, and then I'm going to add on their nose, and then I'm going to use my tool to indent, and I'm going to do a really simple mouth for my bunny. For all of the details on the face, I am using that same airbrush color that I used before for that birch section, and even though it is brown, it's turning out pretty black because it's very concentrated here. I should also mention that all the fondant on this cake is just stuck on directly and is sticking to the buttercream, but if your fondant is not sticking, just use a little bit of water, or you can use an edible paste, which is basically Tylose powder mixed with water. And for all of my fondant detailing today, I'm just using a little bit of water to attach everything. For this final bunny on top, I am putting a skewer on here because they have no support in the back like all of the other bunnies. So I am putting this in here so that the head and the back is fully supported. Now time for the bunny's little flower crowns, and I'm just using some of that leftover buttercream that I had, and I'm making the same leaves that I did all over the cake. Now I'm adding just a little bit of this golden sprinkle all over their crowns just to give them a little bit of glamour. Now I'm going to make sure that their cheeks are adorable and blushy. This really reminds me of the first cookies that I made on my channel, which were little bunnies with flower crowns as well. I like to use petal dust for this, but you could also use luster dust if you want it to be a little bit more shiny. I wanted the top bunny to be a little bit more playful, so you'll notice that the paws are standing up, and I'm just adding a bunch of flowers, and I'm adding a little bit more flower here and there just to fill in those gaps. I'm also adding on some roses. I've done a lot of fondant rose tutorials, so you can go ahead and check that out in the right hand corner if you want to see how I do that. Whenever I think of spring and Easter, I think of Easter eggs, so I'm adding on all of those little Easter eggs here. And to give it that little speckled pattern, I just use a little paintbrush. And I find whenever you want to do speckles, the rougher the bristle, the better, so that you can just kind of lightly dip it into your airbrush color and then speckle it on there. But honestly, if you don't want to waste time sitting there making eggs, I say go out and buy those Cadbury eggs. They are delicious and they are perfect. And here is our box cake mix transformation. I know I've done 2 other videos. The first one was a single tier, the second one was 2 tiers, and this one is 3 tiers. So maybe the 4th one is gonna be 4 tiers. I'm not so sure. Let me know down in the comments below if you guys want to keep seeing these types of videos. Now let's get into the pricing. Now you guys know how much I would price this for because it was in the title of the video. However, just like in my other box cake mix videos, I am basing this price on me making everything from scratch because when I did run my home baking business, I did make everything from scratch. However, I know some of you do like to use a box cake mix and add your own little flair to it.
Thanks so much for watching.
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you can be part of the Sweetie fam. Right now, I'm uploading daily, so make sure you hit that notification bell so you know when I upload. Also, be sure to comment, request, or ask a question. I love hearing from you guys.